The morning was heavy with the smell of rain-soaked earth. Days of storms had turned the Corexit River into a restless force, its waters rushing with a power that could sweep away branches, stones, even the strongest footing. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of gray that feels like it presses down on everything beneath it. On the muddy bank, a lone priest sat on horseback, steadying the animal as it shifted beneath him. The leather satchel slung across his shoulder was not just an ordinary bag. Inside it rested a small gilded container called a pyx, no bigger than his hand. And within that container were several consecrated hosts, the Eucharist, which Catholics believe is the true body of Christ. To the priest, this was more than bread. It was a holy gift, the most precious thing he could carry. The priest had crossed this river many times before. Usually, at this time of year, the Corexit was no more than a gentle stream winding between reeds, shallow enough to wade across, but the rains had been heavy inland, and the water came surging down from the hills, turning the gentle stream into a rushing torrent. Still, there was no time to wait. Beyond the river, somewhere in a nearby village, someone lay sick and was waiting to receive the sacraments. Every arm mattered. The priest took a deep breath, whispered a prayer under his breath, and urged the horse forward into the water. The cold struck first at his boots, then climbed up to his knees. The horse shifted uneasily under the pressure of the current, and the priest gripped the reins tighter, step by slow step. They moved deeper into the river. Halfway across, it happened. The horse jolted, the current pulled harder, and the satchel swung out to the side. The strap, wet from the rain, snapped with a sharp crack. In that instant, the priest saw the flash of gold as the pyx tumbled from the bag. It glinted once in the pale light before the river swallowed it whole. A wave of panic hit him. It wasn't just a container lost to the water. It was the Eucharist, the real presence, now drifting somewhere beneath the churning surface. His chest tightened as he scanned the river, desperate for any glimpse of it. But the brown, rushing water gave nothing back. On the far bank, villagers had seen his struggle and began running toward the shore. Some waded into the river to help, but the current was too strong. One by one, they were forced back. The priest stood waist deep in the water, soaked and gasping, his eyes locked on the place where the pyx had vanished. He could do no more. The river had taken it. To understand why this moment carried so much weight, you have to step back to the year 1348. This was medieval Spain, a time when the land was still marked by centuries of battles between Christian kingdoms and Muslim rule. By then, the region of Valencia and the villages of Albera and Almacera were under Christian governance. But the memory of conflict was never far from people's minds. Life was simple, but hard. Fishing, farming, and the changing seasons shaped daily existence, and the church was at the heart of the community in those days. The Eucharist was revered with deep awe. It was not just a symbol. For Catholics, it was the true body of Christ, consecrated at the altar, carrying it outside. The church was not done lightly, except in times of great need, like bringing it to someone sick or dying. So when a priest set out with the Eucharist, it was as if he carried a piece of heaven in his hands. The journey was often urgent. Priests went through storms, crossed mountains, and on this day, stepped into a river at full flood. The pyx itself was likely gold-plated, polished from years of use, carefully wrapped to protect it from dust and dirt. But no wrapping could save it from what happened that morning. The strap breaking, the flash of gold sinking, and the awful knowledge that the most sacred thing he carried was now lost to the river. For a medieval Catholic, this was not just a practical loss. It was a spiritual tragedy. The villagers who reached the bank understood without needing an explanation. They knew the Eucharist had been lost, and they could see the grief in the priest's face. It was as if a child had been lost to the current. The crowd stood in silence, the sound of the rushing water filling the air. The priest closed his eyes and prayed, his lips moving silently, "Lord, do not let your body be lost to us." The villagers began to drift back, resigned to the fact that there was nothing they could do. But downstream, a fisherman noticed something strange. At first, it looked like sunlight glinting off the water, just a shimmer. But then it grew brighter. Two shapes began to rise from the depths, slow and steady, as if they were carrying something. They were fish, large, silver-scaled, their bodies glistening in the gray light. They swam together in perfect sync, and between them, balanced. Across their backs was the pyx. Water slid from its sides in thin sheets. It did not sink or roll. It rested steadily as the fish carried it forward. The priest's breath caught. He stepped toward them, fighting the pull of the river with every stride. The fish didn't dart away or break formation. They moved closer, slowing as if waiting for him. When he reached them, he bent down, his hands breaking through the cold surface, and lifted the pyx. It was cool and heavy in his grasp. The moment it left their backs, the fish slipped beneath the water and vanished. He opened the pyx, his hands trembling. Inside, the hosts were dry, perfectly dry, untouched by the river. Not a single drop had touched them. Gasps rose from the river bank. Some villagers fell to their knees in the wet grass, their heads bowed. Others whispered prayers, their voices shaking. The priest held the pyx close to his chest and walked back toward the shore. As soon as he stepped on dry ground, the bells in the village began to ring. No one had ordered it. Someone had simply run ahead and pulled the rope, and the sound rolled out over the fields, carrying the news before anyone spoke a word. The body of Christ had been lost and returned, not by chance, but carried by the creatures of the river. As if even nature itself had bent to protect what was holy. The bells rang for hours. People left their work and hurried to the church to see for themselves. By the time the priest arrived, the steps were crowded. His cassock clung to him, soaked through, and his boots left wet prints on the floor. But in his arms, wrapped now in linen, was the Eucharist, intact. He placed the pyx on the altar, and without being told, the villagers knelt. The air was heavy, not with dampness or smoke, but with a quiet awe. The priest sent word to the bishop of Valencia, and within days, the bishop himself arrived. He listened to the priest, to the fishermen, and to the villagers, all of whom told the same story. To fish, side by side, carrying the pyx, the bishop examined the hosts. They were dry, pure, without damage. He visited the river bank and studied the depth, the speed of the current, and the conditions. There was no natural way the pyx could have been recovered like this. After prayer and careful consideration, the bishop declared what everyone already believed. It was a miracle. From that day forward, the miracle of Albera and Almacera was commemorated every year. A solemn procession would cross the Corexit, retracing the path of the priest. The pyx, now kept in a place of honor, would be carried under a canopy, surrounded by flowers, hymns, and candles. The exact spot on the river bank was marked, not just with stone, but in memory. Parents told their children. Travelers carried the story to other towns. The image of the fish carrying the Eucharist became a symbol, painted on church walls, carved into stone, printed on prayer cards. The centuries rolled on. Wars came and went. Droughts came and passed, but the feast never stopped. Even in hard years, people gathered at the river. The procession always paused at the place where the fish had risen from the depths, and prayers of thanksgiving were offered. Over time, pilgrims came from far away, some out of curiosity, many out of deep faith. The story reminded them that God's care could reach them through the most unexpected means. In a world where faith is often questioned, where miracles are met with doubt, this story continues to speak. It tells us that God is present not only in great, dramatic events, but also in the quiet ways creation serves him. The fish of Albera did not forget what they carried. And perhaps the lesson is that we should never forget what we are given. Each time we approached the altar, the river was louder than usual that morning. It wasn't the gentle sound of water sliding over stones that the priest was used to hearing. It was the deep, urgent rush of a force that had grown restless after days of unending rain. The banks were dark with soaked earth, and the air smelled heavy, like wet soil and the distant tang of the sea. Clouds hung so low they seemed almost close enough to touch, pressing down over the village and the fields beyond. The priest sat tall on his horse at the edge of the Corexit River, though his heart felt anything but steady. His eyes moved over the churning surface, the froth forming at the edges, the brown current pulling debris along like a hand sweeping away crumbs. He knew these waters well. Many times he had crossed here, sometimes with baskets of bread for the poor, sometimes with letters from the bishop, and sometimes with the most precious cargo of all, the Eucharist. But never had the river looked like this. His satchel hung from his shoulder, the leather worn from years of use. Inside, wrapped in linen and kept within a small, gold-plated container called a pyx, were several consecrated